The morning frost hadn't yet melted from the window panes when they came for her. Ruth pressed her palm against the cold glass, watching her breath fog the view of the Montana prairie stretching endlessly beyond their homestead. She'd known this day would come, had felt it building in the hostile silences, the averted eyes, the whispered conversations that ceased whenever she entered a room. "Ruth Wright." Martha's voice cracked like a whip through the thin walls. "Get yourself out here this instant." Ruth's hand instinctively moved to her belly, where life stirred beneath layers of wool and shame. 4 months along now, though she'd hidden it well until last week when Martha had caught her being sick behind the chicken coop. The secret was out, spreading through their household like wildfire, poisoning everything it touched. She emerged from her small room to find her 3 sisters waiting in the main room. Martha, the eldest at 26, stood rigid as a fence post, her face carved from stone. Beside her, Sarah clutched a rolling pin like a weapon, while young Constance, barely 16 herself, hung back near the door, tears streaming down her face. "You've brought disgrace upon this family," Martha said, each word dropping like a hammer blow. "Papa's turning in his grave, knowing what you've become." Ruth lifted her chin, though her knees trembled. "I've become nothing but what God made me." The slap came swift and hard, snapping Ruth's head to the side. Sarah had moved faster than thought, the rolling pin clattering to the floor as she grabbed Ruth's hair. "Don't you dare speak of God," Sarah hissed. "Not with that bastard growing in your belly. Not after what you've done." They descended upon her then, Martha and Sarah, their hands rough and merciless. They tore at her dress, pulled her hair, struck her arms and shoulders. Ruth didn't fight back. What was the point? She'd learned long ago that resistance only made things worse. She curled herself around her middle, protecting what mattered most, enduring the storm of their righteousness. "Stop it," Constance finally cried. "Stop it, please, she's our sister." "She's no sister of mine," Martha declared, stepping back, breathing hard. Her neat bun had come loose, dark strands framing her flushed face. "Blood doesn't wash away sin. She's nothing to us now, nothing but a burden to be shed." Ruth struggled to her feet, tasting copper where her lip had split. Her dress hung torn at the shoulder, and she could feel bruises already forming on her arms. "Where's Thomas?" she asked, naming the brother who'd sometimes shown her kindness. "Gone to town," Sarah said coldly. "To fetch Mr. Crick." The name sent ice through Ruth's veins. Jedediah Crick, trader, opportunist, and by all accounts, a man who dealt in human misery as readily as he dealt in horses and cattle. "You sold me." The words came out as barely a whisper. Martha's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Sold no day, sister. We're giving you away. Though Mr. Crick was kind enough to offer compensation for his trouble. $5 he'll give us once he's found a place for you. That's more than you're worth, considering your condition." Ruth felt the room spin, but she forced herself to remain upright. "And where will he take me?" "That's no concern of ours," Sarah said, already turning away. "You should have thought of that before you spread your legs for that drifter." "He said he'd marry me," Ruth said quietly, knowing it was useless but needing to say it anyway. "He said—" "Men say many things when they want something," Martha cut her off. "And fools like you believe them. Well, now you'll learn what becomes of loose women. Maybe wherever you end up, you'll remember what you've lost." The sound of horses and wagon wheels in the yard ended the conversation. Through the window, Ruth could see Jedediah Crick climbing down from his wagon, a small, wiry man with a face like dried leather and eyes that missed nothing. Thomas stood beside him, unable to meet Ruth's gaze as she was marched outside. The December air bit through Ruth's torn dress, but the cold was nothing compared to the chill in her sisters' faces. Neighbors had gathered misses. Henderson from the next farm over, the Paulson boys, even old Mr. Garrett all come to witness her shame. "This the girl?" Crick asked, looking Ruth over like livestock at auction. His gaze lingered on her middle, and his thin lips curved in what might have been sympathy or calculation. "This is her," Martha confirmed. "As we discussed, she goes with you now, and she doesn't come back. Ever." Crick nodded slowly. "I know a place. Man up near Billings looking for help with his homestead. Respectable enough, keeps to himself. She'll work for her keep." "I don't care where she goes," Sarah said, "as long as it's away from here." Ruth looked around at the faces she'd known all her life, her family, her neighbors, her world, and saw only judgment and relief. Only Constance wept. But even she didn't step forward when Crick took Ruth's arm. "Get your things," he said, not unkindly. "One bag is all I got room for." Ruth moved as if in a dream, gathering her few possessions, 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a small sewing kit, the miniature portrait of her parents from better days. Her hands shook as she folded everything into a worn carpet bag. When she emerged, Crick had already turned his wagon around. "Ruth." Thomas finally spoke as she climbed up beside the trader. I'm sorry it came to this." She looked at him, her brother, who'd taught her to read, who'd carved wooden whistles for her when she was small, and saw a stranger. "No," she said quietly. "You're not." As the wagon rolled away, Ruth didn't look back. Not at first, but when they reached the bend in the road, something made her turn. The house sat small and weathered against the vast sky, her sisters already heading back inside, the neighbors dispersing to spread the gossip. Only Constance remained in the yard, a small figure growing smaller, her hand raised in what might have been farewell or merely brushing away tears. Then the road turned, and everything Ruth had ever known disappeared behind a hill. Crick drove in silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking a lonely rhythm. Finally, he spoke. "Most times, when I'm hauling cargo, it's pigs or chickens making all the noise. You're quieter than livestock, I'll give you that." Ruth said nothing, her hands folded protectively over her belly. "Don't suppose you want to tell me who the father was?" "Would it matter if I did?" Crick spat tobacco juice over the side of the wagon. "Suppose not, though I'm guessing whoever he was. He's long gone by now." "Yes," Ruth admitted. "He's gone." They drove on as the sun climbed higher, burning off the frost but bringing no warmth. After an hour, Crick spoke again. "That man I mentioned, Ward Ellis is his name. Lost his wife and boy to fever 2 winters back. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's fair. Won't beat you, least not without cause. Can't say better than that." "And if he doesn't want me when he sees—" Ruth gestured vaguely at herself. "Then I find somewhere else." Crick said simply, "Always someone needing an extra pair of hands, even damaged goods. Though between you and me, Ellis won't turn you away. Man's got too much emptiness in that house of his. Might be you'll fill it some." Ruth closed her eyes, feeling the child move within her, somewhere out there. Daniel was probably charming another foolish girl with promises of marriage and California gold. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was surviving the next day, and the next, and all the days after until this child could draw breath. "How much?" she asked suddenly. "How much did they really get from me?" Crick glanced at her sideways. "You sure you want to know?" "Yes." $20, he said. 10 now, 10 when I confirm you're settled." Ruth laughed, then a sharp, bitter sound that startled the horses. $20, the price of her entire life, of every memory and moment, every dream and hope. $20 to erase a daughter, a sister, a person. Something funny. "Everything," Ruth said, and found she couldn't stop laughing, even as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Everything's funny, Mr. Crick. Don't you see they sold their own blood for less than the price of a good milk cow?" Crick said nothing to that, just drove on, while Ruth's laughter turned to sobs and finally to silence. The prairie rolled past, endless and indifferent, and Ruth Wright, who had been someone's daughter, Someone's sister became nobody at all. Just a pregnant girl in a trader's wagon, heading toward whatever fate $20 could buy. The journey to Ward Ellis's homestead took 2 days through country that grew wilder with each passing mile. The flatlands gave way to foothills, then to proper mountains that scraped the belly of gray December clouds. Snow began falling as they climbed higher, fat flakes that stuck to Ruth's eyelashes and melted cold trails down her cheeks. By the time Crick's wagon creaked to a stop in front of a modest log cabin, Ruth could barely feel her fingers despite the blanket the trader had grudgingly shared. The house sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, their branches heavy with snow. Smoke rose from the chimney, the only sign of life in what seemed like the edge of the world. "Wait here," Crick instructed, climbing down stiffly. He approached the door and knocked 3 sharp raps that echoed in the mountain silence. Ruth watched as the door opened to reveal a man's silhouette. Even from the wagon, she could sense his stillness, the way he held himself apart like a wild thing ready to bolt. Crick gestured as he spoke, occasionally pointing back at the wagon, at her. The man Ward Ellis. She assumed never moved, never nodded, just stood there like he'd been carved from the same wood as his door frame. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Ellis stepped out into the snow. He was taller than she'd expected, broad-shouldered but lean, wearing a heavy coat that had seen better years. As he approached the wagon, Ruth got her first clear look at his face weathered by sun and wind, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of winter slate. He might have been 30 or 40. Hardship had a way of aging folks beyond their years out here. He stopped beside the wagon and looked up at her, those gray eyes taking in everything: her torn dress, her bruised face, the protective way she held her middle. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gaze. Not pity, exactly, recognition. Maybe. The look of someone who understood what it meant to be broken. "What's your name?" His voice was deeper than she'd expected, rough from disuse. "Ruth." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "My family name doesn't matter anymore." He studied her for another long moment. Then his eyes dropped to her belly. A muscle ticked in his jaw. But when he spoke again, his tone hadn't changed. "Can you work?" "Yes." "Cook good?" "Yes." "Keep house, mend clothes, tend stock?" "All of it. I've been keeping house since I was 10. Ellis nodded slowly, then looked at Crick. "She'll do." That was it. No negotiation. No questions about her past or her condition. Crick helped her down from the wagon, handed over her carpet bag, and collected whatever payment Ellis offered him. Ruth didn't watch the money change hands, didn't want to know what her life was worth in this new accounting. "I'll check back come spring," Crick said, already climbing back onto his wagon. "Make sure everything's settled proper." Ellis didn't respond, just stood there holding Ruth's bag as Crick drove away, leaving her standing in the snow with a stranger when the wagon disappeared around a bend. Ellis finally moved. "Come on then," he said, heading for the house. "No sense freezing to death on the first day." The cabin was larger inside than it appeared, with a main room that served as kitchen and living space, and 2 doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean, but spare a table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fire, shelves holding a few dishes and supplies. It was a house kept by someone who needed very little, who'd pared life down to its essentials. "That's your room," Ellis said, pointing to one of the doors. "Was my boy's room. Before, bed's small, but it'll do. You'll find some clothes in the trunk, they were my wife's. Might need taking in, but they're warm." Ruth clutched her bag tighter. "Mr. Ellis, I should tell you." "I know what I need to know," he interrupted. "You're here. You'll work. And come spring, you'll have a child to tend along with everything else. Long as you pull your weight, we'll get along fine." And if the baby comes early, if I can't, then we'll figure it out when it happens. He moved to the stove, lifting the lid on a pot that smelled of stew. You hungry? Ruth realized she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Yes. Sit then, and you can drop the Mr. Ellis. Just Ward is fine. She sat at the table while he ladled stew into 2 bowls, the first hint that maybe she wasn't just hired help. If he was willing to eat with her. The stew was simple but good, heavy with venison and root vegetables. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the wind testing the windows. I get up at dawn, Ward said finally, pushing his empty bowl away. I'll expect breakfast ready when I come in from feeding stock, dinner at noon, supper when the sun sets, washing on Mondays, mending when needed. There's a root cellar out back, smokehouse too, creek's a short walk east for water, though I try to keep the barrel filled. Questions? No. Good. He stood, carrying both bowls to the wash basin. Get yourself settled tonight. Work starts tomorrow. Ruth stood to help with the dishes, but he waved her off. Tonight you rest. Plenty of time for chores later. She retreated to the small bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. The room was simple, a narrow bed with a quilt that had seen better days, a trunk at the foot, pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. On a small shelf sat a few carved wooden animals' horses, a dog, a bird with its wings spread, boys' treasures, lovingly made. Opening the trunk, she found dresses and undergarments, all clean and carefully folded, smelling faintly of lavender. Handling another woman's clothes felt strange, intimate in a way that made her throat tight. Who had she been? Ward's wife. Had she stood at that same stove, mended clothes by that same fire? Had she known happiness here before fever took her and her boy? Ruth changed into one of the dresses blue wool, a bit loose but warm, and sat on the edge of the bed. Through the small window, she could see snow falling heavier now, erasing the tracks of Crick's wagon. By morning, there'd be no sign she'd come from anywhere at all. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Ruth. She opened the door to find Ward holding a pile of blankets. Thought you might need extra. Gets cold up here, especially for someone not used to the mountains. Thank you. She took the blankets, surprised by the gesture. Ward, why did you agree to this to me? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, man gets tired of eating his own cooking, gets tired of the quiet. It wasn't the whole truth she could see that in the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes, but it was all he was willing to share. She nodded, accepting the partial answer. There's one more thing, he said, already turning away. Don't go wandering far from the house, especially not with snow coming. Mountains aren't forgiving to those who don't know them. And Ruth, he paused at her doorway. Whatever you're running from, it ends at my property line. Understood. Understood. He left then, and she heard his door close across the hall. Ruth spread the extra blankets on the bed, then sat by the window watching snow erase the world. Her hand found her belly where the baby turned and shifted. I don't know if this is an ending or a beginning, she whispered to the child within her. But it's not death. That's something. The fire in the main room crackled and popped, sending warmth even to her small space. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled, answered by another, then another, until the night filled with their wild song. But inside the cabin walls, Ruth felt something she hadn't expected, not safety exactly, but the possibility of it. She lay down fully dressed, too tired to do more, and pulled the blankets up to her chin. Tomorrow would bring work and uncertainty, the challenge of proving herself useful enough to stay. But tonight, for the first time in months, no one was calling her names, no one was striking her or casting her out. She was just Ruth in a small room, with a borrowed dress and a belly full of warm food, listening to a stranger move quietly in the room across the hall. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't home. But it was shelter from the storm, and that was more than she'd dared hope for when she'd climbed into Crick's wagon. Sometimes, she thought as sleep finally took her, Grace came in the strangest forms, a silent man with sad eyes, a cabin at the edge of nowhere, a chance to prove that she was more than her mistakes. The wolves sang on, but Ruth slept deep and dreamless, her hand still curved protective over the life within her, while outside the snow fell and fell, covering tracks and passed alike in forgiving white. The routine established itself within days, as natural as breathing. Ruth woke before dawn, her body somehow knowing when to rise despite the absence of roosters or church bells to mark the hour. She'd build up the fire from the banked embers, set coffee to boil, and have biscuits in the oven by the time Ward came in from the barn, his coat dusted with snow and hay. They ate in companionable silence most mornings, Ward reading week-old newspapers when Crick or other travelers brought them, Ruth planning the day's meals based on what she'd found in the root cellar and smokehouse. He never complained about her cooking, just ate steadily and thoroughly, occasionally reaching for another biscuit with what might have been approval. After breakfast, Ward returned to his outside work mending fences, tending the small herd of cattle he kept, chopping wood for the insatiable stove. Ruth threw herself into the house with a fervor that surprised her. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, reorganized shelves, mended every small tear in every piece of clothing she could find. The work kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering to dangerous territories, to family that had cast her out, to Daniel who'd promised her California and left her with shame. It was the evenings that proved most challenging. After supper, when the dishes were done and the floor swept, they'd sit by the fire, Ward whittling or tending to his tools, Ruth sewing by lamplight. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was heavy with unasked questions, unspoken histories. One night, about 2 weeks into her stay, Ruth's needle slipped and pricked her finger deep enough to draw blood. She hissed involuntarily, bringing the finger to her mouth. "Here," Ward said, the first word either had spoken in an hour. He handed her a clean handkerchief from his pocket. "Thank you." She wrapped the finger, then looked at the shirt she'd been mending one of his, with a tear along the shoulder seam. "You do hard work for one man alone. Ranch doesn't run itself. Did you always do it alone?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, no, had help once. Ruth waited, but he offered nothing more. She returned to her sewing, mindful of her sore finger. After another stretch of silence, she said, "You know, I used to sew for 6 people. My sisters were terrible at it, Martha especially. She'd rush through and leave gaps big enough to put your fist through. Sarah was better but impatient. And Constance." She trailed off, remembering Constance's tears as the wagon pulled away. 6 people, Ward repeated. "Big family." "Was big," Ruth corrected softly. "Now it's just me and—" She gestured vaguely at her middle, which seemed to grow rounder by the day despite her efforts to hide it beneath loose dresses. Ward's eyes followed the gesture, then returned to his whittling. "You pick a name yet?" The question surprised her. It was the first time he'd acknowledged the baby as anything more than a future burden. "No, seemed like bad luck, counting chickens before they hatch." "My wife did that," he said suddenly, "with our boy. Had a whole list of names picked out before he even quickened. Drove me half mad, her reading them out every night. 'What about Matthew?' she'd say. 'Or Mark, biblical names are lucky.'" "What did you settle on?" "James, Jimmy." His hands stilled on the wood. "He lived to be 4. Would have been 8 now." Ruth felt the weight of those lost years in his voice. "I'm sorry. Fever took them both. Sarah first, then Jimmy 2 days later. Doctor said nothing could be done. God's will, he called it." Ward's laugh was bitter. Funny how everything terrible gets called God's will. They sat with that truth between them, the fire popping and settling. Finally, Ruth said. The Father Daniel was his name. He talked about God's will too. Said it was God's will we met. God's will we... She flushed but pushed on. Then when I told him about the baby, suddenly God's will was that he go to California alone. Ward snorted. Convenient. How God's will always seems to match what men want to do anyway. Despite everything, Ruth found herself smiling. That's blasphemous talk, Ward Ellis. Add it to my list of sins. He held up the piece of wood he'd been carving a horse. She realized, with delicate legs and an arched neck. This was going to be for Jimmy's birthday. Been working on it near 2 years now. Can't seem to finish it. Ruth set down her sewing and really looked at him. Then this man who kept carving toys for a dead child, who'd taken in a ruined woman without question or judgment. Maybe it's not meant to be finished. Maybe some things we just carry with us, incomplete. He met her eyes across the fire-lit space, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of shared damage. Then he nodded once and returned to his carving, and Ruth to her sewing. But the silence felt different now. Warmer, somehow. Less like two strangers sharing a roof and more like two survivors sharing a lifeline. The next morning brought a blizzard that rattled the windows and made the walls groan. Ward barely made it back from the barn, fighting through snow that came sideways. Ice crystals clung to his beard and eyebrows, making him look like some winter spirit. Storms settling in, he announced, stamping snow from his boots. Could last days. Hope you're not prone to cabin fever. Ruth ladled hot coffee into a cup, pressing it into his cold hands. I spent 16 years in a house with 6 other people. This is spacious by comparison. As the storm raged outside, they fell into a different rhythm. Ward taught her to play checkers with a set he'd carved himself. The board etched into a piece of pine, the pieces made from light and dark wood. Ruth discovered he had a competitive streak, scowling when she captured his kings, actually grinning when he won. You're not letting me win, are you? She asked after losing her 3rd game. Why would I do that? Some men think women need coddling. Some men are fools. He reset the board. Again. On the 2nd night of the storm, Ruth felt bold enough to ask, why did you really take me in, and don't say you were tired of your own cooking? Ward leaned back in his chair, considering. Ever see a wolf caught in a trap? Once, back home. What did you do? Thomas shot it, said it was a mercy. Most would. Ward moved a checker piece absently. But I saw one once, young female, leg near torn through. Something in her eyes, though not ready to die yet. Still fighting, so I freed her. What happened? She bit me for my trouble. He showed her a scar on his left hand, then limped off into the woods. Saw her again the next winter, running with a pack. That leg healed crooked, but she was running. Ruth understood then what he was really saying. I'm not a wolf, Ward. No, he agreed. You're something fiercer. You're a mother protecting her young. The baby chose that moment to kick, hard enough to make Ruth gasp. Without thinking, she grabbed Ward's hand and placed it on her belly. Feel. He froze, his hand large and warm through the fabric of her dress. The baby kicked again, and his eyes widened. Strong little thing, like a horse trying to kick its way out. She kept her hand over his, holding him there. Some days I'm terrified. Most days, actually. What if I'm no good at it? What if I'm like my mother, who died bringing me into the world? What if... Stop. His voice was gentle but firm. You're already protecting this child, already fighting for it. That's what matters. She realized then how close they were sitting, his hand still on her belly, her hand covering his. The moment stretched, fragile as spun glass, until another fierce kick made them both laugh and pull apart. The storm broke on the 3rd day, leaving behind a world transformed. Drifts reached halfway up the windows, and the pines bowed under their white burden. Ward dug them out while Ruth made a meal hearty enough for the work venison stew thick with potatoes, fresh bread, dried apple pie from stores she'd found in the cellar. "You cook like you're feeding an army," Ward said, accepting his third helping. "Old habit, though you eat like an army, so it works out." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face, making him look younger despite the gray threading his temples. Sarah used to say I had a hollow leg. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife's name without pain crimping his features. Ruth treasured the small victory, filing it away with other signs of thaw, the way he'd started humming while he worked, how he lingered over coffee in the mornings, the small jokes that had begun peppering their conversations. That night, as they sat by the fire, Ruth felt something she hadn't experienced in months: contentment, not happiness, exactly, but a quiet satisfaction with the moment. The cabin was warm, her stomach full, the baby peaceful within her. And across from her sat a man who asked nothing of her but honest work, who looked at her swollen belly without disgust or calculation, who was teaching her that silence could be companionship and shared grief a kind of healing. "Ward," she said suddenly. "Thank you." He looked up from the harness he was mending. "For what?" "For giving me a place, for—" She gestured helplessly. "For treating me like a person instead of a problem." "Ruth," he said, and she realized it was the first time he'd used her name. "You're not a problem. You're—" He frowned, searching for words. "You're just Ruth. That's enough." She had to turn away then, tears threatening. Such simple words, but they meant everything. She wasn't the fallen woman, the family shame, the abandoned girl with a bastard in her belly. She was just Ruth. And somehow, in this cabin at the edge of the world, that was enough. The fire burned low as they worked in comfortable quiet, two damaged souls finding peace in shared silence and simple acceptance. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, but inside was warmth and safety, and the beginning of something neither had expected. Not love, perhaps, but trust. And in that harsh winter landscape, trust was its own kind of miracle. The morning broke crystal clear and bitter cold, the kind of day where breath froze before it left your lips and the snow squeaked underfoot like rusty hinges. Ruth was kneading bread dough when she heard them horses, multiple sets of hooves crunching through the frozen crust, voices carrying on the still air. Ward heard them too. He set down his coffee cup carefully, his face going still in that way she'd learned meant trouble. Moving to the window, he peered out, then cursed softly the first profanity she'd heard from him. "Get to your room," he said, already reaching for the rifle above the door. "Stay there, no matter what you hear." But Ruth had moved to the window herself, and what she saw made her blood turn to ice. 3 riders, their horses steaming in the cold morning air. She recognized the lead man's broad shoulders and red beard even before he swung down from his mount. "Ezra Dole," she whispered, her hand flying to her throat. Ward's eyes sharpened. "You know him?" "My sister Martha's husband. I thought he was in Oregon, buying cattle." Her legs had begun to shake. "He shouldn't be here. How did he find—" "Doesn't matter how." Ward checked the rifle's load with practiced efficiency. "What matters is what he wants." They both knew what he wanted. Ruth's hand moved instinctively to her belly, now too pronounced to hide despite the loose dress. Through the window, she could see Ezra talking to the other riders, gesturing toward the cabin. One man she didn't recognize, but the third— "Oh, God," she breathed. "That's Frank Morrison. He's the sheriff back home." Ward's jaw tightened. "Sheriff's got no authority here. This is Montana territory, not Oregon." He moved away from the window. "Still, best if you're not seen. Get to your room. Bar the door. There's a pistol in the drawer of the bedside table. Sarah's gun. You know how to use it." Ruth nodded, though her hands trembled. "Thomas taught me." "Good. Don't come out unless I call for you." His gray eyes held hers steady. "And Ruth, if things go bad, there's a back window in your room. Woods are 50 yards off. You run, understand, don't look back." Before she could protest, he was opening the door, stepping out onto the porch with the rifle cradled casual in his arms. Ruth retreated to her room but didn't bar the door, not yet. She cracked it open just enough to hear, "Morning, gentlemen." Ward's voice carried clear in the cold air. "Long way from anywhere to be riding. Coffee's hot if you're in need." "Appreciate the offer?" Ezra's voice, still carrying that hint of Irish accent. "But we're not here for hospitality. Looking for someone. Girl about 19, 20. Dark hair, pretty enough when she's not playing the harlot. Goes by Ruth Wright." "Nobody here by that name?" "That's so," Morrison spoke up, his sheriff's star glinting in the morning sun. "Funny thing, though, Jedediah Crick said different. Said he delivered a girl matching that description to this very cabin not 2 months past." "Crick says a lot of things. Man would sell his mother for a profit?" Ruth could hear boots on the porch now. Heavy steps. "Mind if we have a look inside?" Ezra asked, though it wasn't really a question, just to set our minds at ease. "I do mind." Ward's voice had gone flat, dangerous. "This is my property. You've got no business here." "Now see, that's where you're wrong," Morrison said. "This girl's wanted for theft back in Oregon. Stole from her family before she ran. That makes it law business." Ruth's hand flew to her mouth. Theft. She'd taken nothing but what was hers, her clothes, their mother's Bible, the little sewing kit. But she understood now. They needed a legal reason to drag her back, and Martha would say whatever was necessary. "Even if that were true," Ward replied calmly, "you're out of your jurisdiction. Sheriff, your star means nothing here." "Maybe not," Ezra cut in. "But family obligation does. Ruth Wright is my sister by marriage. Her condition brings shame on my household. We've come to take her home where she can be properly cared for." The word sent ice down Ruth's spine. She knew what properly cared for meant locked away somewhere until the baby came. The child given to strangers or worse. And Ruth herself either married off to whoever would have her or sent to one of those homes for wayward women. She'd heard whispers of such places, where girls went in but rarely came out whole. "Asked around in town yesterday." The third man spoke for the first time. "Folks say you've got a woman here. Seen her through the windows, hanging wash, cooking." "You telling us that's not Ruth Wright?" A long pause. Then Ward, "I'm telling you to get off my land." "Or what?" Ezra's voice had gone hard. "You'll shoot 3 men, one of them a lawman. You don't strike me as that kind of fool, Mr. Ellis." "Maybe not, but I'm the kind of fool who doesn't let men drag women off against their will, badge or no badge." Ruth could bear it no longer, despite Ward's orders. She stepped out of her room and into the main cabin. Through the open door, she could see all 4 men Ward with his rifle, still pointed downward but ready. The 3 visitors spread out in a half circle, hands near their weapons but not touching them. Yet. "I'm here," she called out, moving into the doorway behind Ward. "No need for bloodshed." "Ruth," Ezra's face twisted with a mixture of triumph and disgust as he took in her obvious pregnancy. "Look at you. Martha said you'd fallen low, but this is none of your concern," Ruth said, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "I'm not going back with you." "You don't have a choice. Girl." Morrison stepped forward. "You're wanted for theft. That Bible you took Martha says it was hers, not yours. That's enough to arrest you." "The Bible was our mother's," Ruth said quietly. "Left to me specifically. Martha knows that." "Her word against yours," Ezra said with a shrug. "And who's going to believe a woman in your condition over a respectable married lady?" Ward shifted slightly, putting himself more firmly between Ruth and the men. "The lady's made her position clear. She doesn't want to go with you. That's the end of it." "The lady," Ezra laughed, ugly and harsh. "She's no lady. She's a—" "Careful," Ward interrupted. And now the rifle had shifted. Still not quite aimed, but closer. "Next words out of your mouth better be respectful, or they'll be your last." The tension stretched wire-thin. Ruth could hear her own heartbeat, could see Ezra's hand twitch toward his pistol. In the crystal morning, death seemed to hang visible in the air like frozen breath. Then, unexpected salvation came in the form of another horse approaching fast. Jedediah Crick rounded the bend, his wagon bouncing over the frozen ruts. He pulled up short at the scene before him, taking in the positions of all players with a trader's quick assessment. "Well now," he said mildly, "this is quite the welcoming committee. Gentlemen." He nodded to each man. Then his eyes found Ruth. "Miss Ruth. Looking well, I see."
"Crick!"
Ezra spat.
"You led us here. Time to finish what you started."
"Did I?" Crick climbed down from his wagon with deliberate slowness. "Seems to me I told you where I delivered the girl, as was my obligation, but I also seem to recall Mr. Ellis here paid fair and square for household help. That makes her his employee, legal and binding." "She's a thief," Morrison insisted. "Is she now?" Crick produced a folded paper from his coat. "Funny thing about that, I stopped by the county office on my way here. Seems there's no warrant on file for any Ruth Wright. No official complaint neither, just hearsay and hurt feelings. Far as the law's concerned." Morrison's face reddened. "I have a sworn statement from Martha Dole, which isn't worth the paper it's written on outside your jurisdiction." Crick finished. "Now, I'm no lawyer, but I know harassment when I see it. Mr. Ellis here's a respected man in these parts, has friends, the kind of friends who might take poorly to outsiders threatening him on his own land." It was masterfully done. Without taking sides openly, Crick had shifted the balance. Ruth saw Ezra calculating, weighing the cost of pressing forward against the risk of leaving empty-handed. Finally, Ezra stepped back. "This isn't over," he said, his eyes boring into Ruth. "You've brought shame on your family, girl. That baby you're carrying, it'll be born a bastard, raised in sin. And when Ellis here tires of you, and he will, you'll have nowhere to go. No one will take you in. You'll end up in a crib on some back street, selling the only thing you have left to sell." Ruth flinched at the crude words, but Ward stepped forward. "Get off my land, now. And if I see any of you within 10 miles of here again, I'll assume you're here to cause trouble and act accordingly." "We'll go," Morrison said, clearly eager to avoid bloodshed. "But this matter isn't settled." "Yes," Ward said simply. "It is." The three men mounted their horses, Ezra last and most reluctant. As they turned to go, he called back, "You'll regret this, Ellis, mark my words. You'll regret taking in another man's leaving." Ward raised the rifle to his shoulder in one smooth motion, sighting down the barrel. "Right on," he said quietly. "While you still can." They rode, spurring their horses harder than necessary, eager to put distance between themselves and Ward's steady aim. Ruth stood frozen in the doorway until they disappeared over the ridge. Then her knees buckled. Ward caught her before she fell, his arm strong around her waist. "Easy now. They're gone." "They'll be back," she gasped, clinging to his shirt. "Ezra doesn't give up. He'll find a way." "Let him try." Ward guided her to a chair, then poured water from the pitcher. "Drink this." Crick had approached the porch, staying carefully outside. "That was a near thing," he observed. "Ezra Dole's got a reputation for getting what he wants." "Not this time," Ward said firmly. "No, not this time." Crick studied them both, something knowing in his weathered face. "I'll spread word in town. Make sure folks know Miss Ruth is under your protection, legal and proper. Might discourage any future visits." "Appreciate that," Ward said. Crick touched his hat brim. "No need. I don't like bullies. And I especially don't like men who drag a woman in her condition across 300 miles of winter territory. He climbed back onto his wagon. I'll be back end of the month with supplies. Keep your eyes open till then. After he left, Ward barred the door and checked all the windows. Ruth watched him, her hands still trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've brought trouble to your door. Maybe I should."
Stop.
He turned to face her. "You're not going anywhere. Not because of them. But what he said about you taking in another man's—"
I don't give a damn what he said.
The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. "You're here because I chose it. You stay because I choose that too. Their words don't change anything." Ruth felt tears threaten. Why? Why do you care what happens to me?" Ward was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because I know what it's like to lose everything. To have the world take what matters most and leave you hollow. I couldn't save Sarah or Jimmy. But maybe I can keep you safe. You and the little one. Maybe that counts for something." The tears came then, silent streams down her cheeks. Ward stood awkward, clearly unsure what to do with a crying woman. Finally, he patted her shoulder, the gesture clumsy but kind. "They won't take you," he said, and it sounded like a vow. "I promise you that. This is your home now, for as long as you want it." Home. Ruth tested the word in her mind, found it fit better than expected. Outside. The morning had turned toward noon, shadows shortening across the snow, but inside was warmth and safety, and a man who'd stand between her and harm without hesitation or expectation of reward. "Thank you," she whispered. "Nothing to thank me for," Ward said gruffly, already moving toward his coat. "Stock still needs tending. You rest a bit. And Ruth, keep that pistol handy for a few days, just in case." She nodded, watching him go. Through the window, she could see the tracks where Ezra and the others had ridden away. They'd be back, she knew Ezra too well to think otherwise. But looking around the cabin that had become her refuge, feeling the baby turn within her, Ruth found she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She had a home. She had protection. And maybe, just maybe, she had something more growing between her and the quiet man who'd stood against 3 armed riders for her sake. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something worth defending, worth believing in. And after months of having nothing, something was everything. The day had been uncommonly warm for late February, melting snow into muddy slush that made the yard treacherous. Ruth had spent the afternoon doing wash on me, hanging sheets and clothes on the line strung between 2 pines. The baby had been restless all day, turning and kicking as if sensing her unease. 3 weeks had passed since Ezra's visit, 3 weeks of jumping at every sound, of Ward keeping his rifle close and checking the horizon more often than necessary. As darkness fell, Ruth was bringing in the last of the laundry when she herded horses approaching fast, too many to count in the gathering gloom. Her heart seized. She dropped the basket and ran for the cabin, slipping in the mud, catching herself against the porch rail. "Ward," she called, bursting through the door. "They're coming!" He was already moving, had heard them too. In seconds, he had the rifle in hand, was checking the load on his pistol. "How many?" "I don't know. Several, maybe more." Ward's face was grim. "Bar the door behind me. Get to your room like we discussed. Remember back window, straight to the woods. I'm not leaving you. You'll do as I say." His voice brooked no argument. "That baby comes first. Promise me. Ruth. Whatever happens, you run." Before she could respond, he was out the door. Ruth barred it with shaking hands, then ran to her room for Sarah's pistol. Through her window, she could see torches now, 5, 6, maybe 7 riders spreading out in a semicircle before the cabin. Ward Ellis. Ezra's voice carried clear in the night air. "We've come for what's ours. Send the girl out, and nobody needs to die tonight." "Already told you." Ward's voice came from somewhere near the barn he'd taken cover. She's not going anywhere with you. You're outnumbered. Ellis, be smart. A different voice called out one of the men from before. We know she's in there. Saw her at the window. No use pretending otherwise. Ruth's mind raced. 7 men at least, probably more. Ward couldn't hold them off alone. She thought of the back window, the dark woods beyond. She could run, like he'd ordered. Save herself and the baby. It would be the smart thing, the safe thing. Instead, she found herself moving back to the main room, sliding up to the front window. In the flickering torchlight, she could see them clearly now. Ezra in the center, Morrison the sheriff, and at least 6 other men. Her heart sank. Some looked like hired guns, the kind of men who do anything for money. Last chance, Ellis, Ezra called. We've got legal papers now. Proper warrants sworn out by a judge. What judge? Ward's voice came from a different position he was moving, staying unpredictable. What court you're lying, Dole, and we both know it. That's when Ruth saw him, Jedediah Crick, riding hard down the trail. And he wasn't alone. 2 other riders flanked him, and she recognized one immediately, Samuel Briggs, the territorial marshal who sometimes stopped by the cabin for coffee and news. Hold! Briggs' voice boomed across the yard. Everyone hold, in the name of the law. The riders turned, confused by this new development. Ezra's hand moved toward his gun, but Briggs was already drawing his own. I wouldn't, Mr. Dole, not unless you want to hang for killing a federal marshal. Crick and Briggs positioned themselves between the cabin and Ezra's men. The 3rd rider Ruth didn't recognize, but he had the look of a lawman too. Marshal Briggs. Morrison spoke up, trying to sound official. We're here on legal business. This woman is wanted. For what? Briggs interrupted. I've checked every warrant. Every complaint filed in 3 territories. There's nothing on any Ruth Wright. What there is, however, is a complaint filed this morning about harassment, trespass, and attempted kidnapping. Filed by one Ward Ellis against Ezra Dole and parties unknown.
That's a lie,
Ezra snarled. Is it? Crick spoke up. Because I witnessed you threatening Mr. Ellis on his own property not 3 weeks past. As did Marshal Briggs hear your intentions when you stopped in town for supplies. Something about taking a girl whether she wanted to go or not. Ruth could hardly breathe. They'd planned this, Ward and Crick had set a trap, and Ezra had walked right into it. She's my sister, Ezra tried. Family matter. Sister-in-law, Briggs corrected. And last I checked, that don't give you ownership of a grown woman. Now, I'm going to give you boys one chance to ride out peaceful-like. Otherwise, my deputy here will be taking names for arrest warrants. But Ezra had come too far to back down now. His face twisted with rage, and Ruth saw him reach for his gun. Like hell. The night exploded. Ezra's gun cleared leather, but Ward's rifle spoke first. Ezra spun and fell from his horse. Then everyone was shooting. The night full of muzzle flashes and the crack of gunfire. Ruth threw herself down as windows shattered above her. She heard Ward's rifle firing steadily, heard Briggs shouting orders. A man screamed. Horses whinnied in terror. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. Then someone was kicking at the door. The bar held for 1 blow, 2, then splintered on the 3rd. A man burst through one of the hired guns, eyes wild, gun raised. Ruth didn't think, just raised Sarah's pistol and fired. The man staggered back, clutching his shoulder, and Ward appeared in the doorway behind him, striking him down with the rifle butt. You hurt, Ward demanded, eyes scanning Ruth quickly. No, I, Ward, behind you. He spun, firing as another man tried to rush the door. The attacker fell across the threshold. Ward kicked him aside, then grabbed Ruth's arm. Come on, too exposed here. He pulled her toward the back of the cabin, but through the window, Ruth could see more men circling around. They were trying to flank them, cut off escape. The cellar, she gasped. Under the kitchen. Ward nodded, understanding immediately. He yanked up the trap door, practically threw Ruth down the ladder, then followed, pulling the door shut above them. The root cellar was small, cramped, but solid. They could hear boots thundering overhead, men shouting. Where'd they go? Check every room. Dole's down Morrison, too. Ward reloaded in the darkness, his movements sure despite the lack of light. Ruth pressed herself against the earthen wall, one hand on her belly where the baby kicked frantically, responding to her terror. Gunfire continued outside. Briggs and his men still fighting, then terrifyingly close. A voice above them. They've got to be here somewhere. Tear the place apart if you have to. Ward raised his rifle, aiming at the cellar door. If they found it. Then Crick's voice, loud and urgent. Fire! The barn's caught fire! Confusion above. Boots running. Get water! I'll let it burn. Find the girl. You damn fool! The whole forest will go if that spreads. More chaos. Men shouting contradictory orders. The gunfire was sporadic now. Then Briggs' voice, clear and commanding. Throw down your weapons. Any man still armed in 10 seconds will be shot. A few more shots. Then relative quiet. Ruth could hear groaning. Someone crying out in pain. Ward kept his rifle trained on the cellar door. Waiting. Finally. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Crick's voice came directly above them. Ward, it's clear Briggs has them. Still, Ward waited, cautious. How many down? Dole's dead. Morrison's hit bad. 2 others won't be getting up again. Rest are surrendering or run off. Only then did Ward lower his rifle. He pushed open the cellar door carefully, then helped Ruth up. The cabin was a mess, furniture overturned, windows shot out, blood on the threshold. But they were alive. Outside was worse. Bodies lay where they'd fallen. Ezra Dole stared sightlessly at the stars, a dark stain spreading beneath him. Morrison was propped against a tree, Briggs's deputy binding what looked like a gut wound. 3 of Ezra's hired men sat with hands bound, watched by Briggs. Anyone hurt bad on our side? Ward asked. Crick took one in the arm, Briggs reported. Nothing serious. You two? We're fine. Ward's hand found Ruth's elbow, steadying her as she swayed. It's done. It's done. These boys will be taking a trip to the territorial prison. As for the dead, Briggs shrugged. Self-defense, clear as day. They came looking for trouble and found it. Ruth stared at Ezra's body, waiting to feel something grief, perhaps, or guilt. He'd been family, after a fashion, but all she felt was relief and a bone-deep exhaustion. I need to sit, she said faintly. Ward guided her to the porch steps, then went to help with the wounded and dead. Ruth sat in the cold night air, smelling gunpowder and blood, watching men clean up the aftermath of violence. Her hands had finally stopped shaking. Crick approached, his left arm in a makeshift sling. You did good, girl, keeping your head like that. I shot a man, she said wonderingly. You protected yourself and your baby. Nothing wrong in that. He studied her with knowing eyes. Your man there planned this well. Knew they'd come at night, knew they'd come in force. Smart to get Briggs involved. He's not my, Ruth started, then stopped. What was Ward to her employer protector? Something more. Sure he's not, Crick said with something like a smile. You rest now. Long night ahead yet. It was near dawn before the bodies were dealt with, the prisoners secured for transport, the barn fire fully doused. Ward had boarded up the broken windows as best he could, swept up the glass, scrubbed blood from the floors. Ruth helped where she could, but he kept ordering her to rest. Finally, as the first pink light touched the mountains, they found themselves alone. Briggs and his prisoners were gone. Crick to town for the doctor. The cabin felt strange, too quiet after all the violence. It's over, Ward said, slumping in his chair. They won't come for you again. Ruth poured coffee with hands that barely trembled. Ezra's dead because of me.
Ezra's dead because he couldn't leave well enough alone.
Ward's voice was firm.
Because he thought he owned you. Because he brought violence to our door.
Our door. Ruth noticed the word, filed it away. I never thanked you for standing for me, for planning. She gestured vaguely at the boarded windows, the scrubbed floors.
No thanks needed.
He sipped his coffee, grimaced.
Though you might want to make a fresh pot. This tastes like gunpowder.
Despite everything, Ruth found herself almost smiling. Ward Ellis, you just fought off 7 men, killed at least 1, and you're complaining about coffee. Man's gotta have standards. But his eyes were serious as they met hers. Are you truly all right, the baby?
We're fine. Scared. But fine.
She placed a hand on her belly.
Though I think this little one's going to come out fighting. After tonight. Good, Ward said fiercely. World like this, knowing how to fight is necessary.
They sat quietly as the sun rose higher, painting the snow-capped peaks gold. The cabin bore scars from the night's violence, but it stood solid still. They'd survived. More than that, they'd won the right to be left in peace.
Ruth, Ward said suddenly. What I said before, about you being safe here, I meant it. This is your home, long as you want it. Nobody's going to drive you off. Not while I'm breathing.
Ruth looked at this man who'd killed for her, who'd faced down 7 armed men without flinching, who was offering her not just shelter, but belonging. I believe you, she said simply. And she did, for the first time since Daniel had left her with promises and lies, since her family had cast her out like refuse. Ruth Wright believed she might actually be safe, that she might have found not just a hiding place, but a home. The baby kicked, strong and sure, and Ruth smiled. I think someone agrees, she said, and was rewarded with the rarest of sights, Ward Ellis smiling back, his gray eyes warm in the morning light. The decision to move came 3 days after the shootout. Ward announced it over breakfast, his voice carefully neutral. Know a place up the mountain, old trapper's cabin. Haven't been there in years, but it's solid, harder to find, easier to defend. Ruth looked up from her plate, reading the concern in his eyes. You think they'll send more men?
No, but I'd rather be certain.
He pushed eggs around his plate, not eating. It's a hard journey, 2 days by wagon, and the trail's rough. With you being... He gestured vaguely at her swollen middle. I can manage, Ruth said firmly. When do we leave? Tomorrow, if you're able. Want to get there before the next snow? They spent the day packing essentials, food, blankets, ammunition, tools. Ward loaded the wagon carefully while Ruth wrapped dishes and gathered what medical supplies they had. She found herself taking small things too, the carved animals from Jimmy's shelf, a quilt she'd mended by the fire, the checkers set, things that had made the cabin feel like home. The journey was harder than Ward had warned. The trail wound up through pine forests and along ridges where one wheel wrong meant a long fall. Ruth gripped the wagon seat, trying not to gasp every time they hit a rut. The baby seemed to protest each jolt, turning and kicking relentlessly. You need to stop, Ward asked for the 10th time. I'm fine, Ruth insisted, though sweat beaded her forehead despite the cold. By afternoon of the 2nd day, she wasn't fine. A deep, grinding pain had started in her back, radiating around to her belly. She tried to hide it, but Ward noticed her white knuckles, the way she bit her lip. How long? He asked quietly. An hour, maybe 2. She met his eyes, saw her own fear reflected there. It's too early. I've got 6 weeks yet.
Babies come when they come.
But his hands tightened on the reins, urging the horses faster. The cabin appeared just as the sun touched the western peaks, smaller than their home below, but sturdy, with thick walls and few windows. Ward had barely stopped the wagon before Ruth doubled over.
a cry escaping her lips. "Let's get you inside," he said, his voice steady though she could see panic in his eyes. The cabin was dusty but dry. Ward lit a fire quickly, then helped Ruth to the single bed. Another contraction hit, stronger than before, and she gripped his hand hard enough to leave marks. "I need to unhitch the horses," he said when it passed. "Don't leave me." The words came out more desperate than she intended. "I'm not going anywhere. Just outside for a minute. You're strong. Ruth, you can do this." But when he returned, Ruth was curled on her side, tears streaming. "Something's wrong. It hurts different than it should." Ward had delivered calves and foals, even helped a neighbor with a birth once. But this Ruth's pain. The baby coming too soon, this terrified him more than any shootout. He washed his hands in water heated on the stove. Tried to remember everything Sarah's midwife had said during Jimmy's birth. "I need to check the baby's position," he said. "I'll be gentle as I can." What he found made his heart sink. The baby was turned wrong. Coming feet first, he'd seen it in cattle, knew how dangerous it was. But he kept his face calm. "The baby's just eager," he said. "Wants to come out running." Ruth managed a weak laugh that turned into a groan. "Don't compare me to your livestock, Ward Ellis. Wouldn't dream of it. You're much more contrary than any cow." Hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. Ward talked Ruth through each contraction, held her when she shook, wiped sweat from her face. Outside, full dark had fallen, and snow began to drift against the windows. "I can't," Ruth gasped after a particularly brutal contraction. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can." Ward gripped her shoulders, made her look at him. "You're the strongest woman I know. You survived your family casting you out. You survived that bastard Dole. You can survive this." "What if the baby will be fine, and so will you." He said it like a fact, like something already decided. "Now, when the next pain comes, you push hard as you can." Ruth had never known such agony. It felt like being torn in half, like her body was breaking apart. She screamed, not caring who might hear in this wilderness. Ward stayed steady, encouraging her, guiding the baby's emergence with careful hands. "Feet are out," he reported. "You're doing perfect. Another push." "I hate you," Ruth snarled through gritted teeth. "I know. Push anyway." She did, bearing down with everything she had. The room spun. Black spots danced in her vision. Then Ward was saying something urgent, his hands working quickly. "One more, Ruth, one more big push. The shoulders are stuck, but one more." Ruth pushed, screaming, certain she was dying. Then suddenly the pressure released, and a thin wail filled the cabin. Ward held a tiny, blood-slick form, his face awestruck. "It's a girl," he whispered. "Ruth, you have a daughter." Ruth reached for her with shaking arms. The baby was small, too small, but her cries were strong. Dark hair plastered to her tiny head. Miniature fists waving in indignation at this cold, bright world. Is she all right?" Ward wrapped the baby in a clean blanket, his movements infinitely gentle. "She's perfect. Small, but perfect. Look at her fighting already." Ruth cradled her daughter, tears flowing freely. The baby's eyes opened dark blue, unfocused but somehow seeing. "Hello, little one," Ruth whispered. "Oh, hello." Ward dealt with the afterbirth, cleaned Ruth as best he could, brought her water and clean linens. His competence surprised her until she remembered he'd done this before. With Sarah. The thought should have hurt, but instead it comforted. He knew what to do. "She needs a name," Ward said, settling into a chair beside the bed. He looked exhausted, his shirt blood-stained, but his eyes were warm as he watched mother and child. "Grace," Ruth said without hesitation. "Her name is Grace." "Grace Ellis." Ruth looked up sharply. Ward's face reddened. "I mean, That is, he cleared his throat. Might be easier, is all, for records and such, if people think. Ward? Ruth reached out, caught his hand. Are you asking something? He met her eyes then. This man who'd protected her, fought for her, delivered her child with his own hands. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm saying she needs a proper name. And maybe you both need more than just shelter. Ruth's heart hammered. What are you offering? A name, a home, a family, if you'll have it. He squeezed her hand carefully. I can't promise to be like other men. What Sarah and I had, that was different. But I care for you, Ruth, both of you, and I'd be proud to call Grace my daughter, legal and true. Ruth studied his weathered face, saw the sincerity there. This wasn't a grand passion like what she'd thought she had with Daniel, but it was real, solid as the mountains around them. Yes, she whispered. Yes. Yes, Ward Ellis, I'll marry you. We'll be a family. He smiled then, that rare true smile that transformed him. Good, that's good. Grace chose that moment to wail, breaking the tender moment. Ruth shifted her to nurse, wincing at the pull on her battered body. She's hungry, she said unnecessarily. She's alive, Ward countered. Strong and alive and free, that's what matters. Ruth looked down at her daughter, successfully latched now. Tiny fingers curled against her breast. Born in violence and flight, in pain and fear, but here, alive, with a father who'd chosen her, a name that meant belonging. I was so scared, she admitted. When the pain started, when I knew she was coming too soon. I was terrified, Ward confessed. When I saw she was breech, I thought, he shook his head. But you did it, strongest thing I've ever seen. They sat quietly, watching Grace nurse. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the world in white. The cabin was warm, safe, removed from all who might wish them harm. What will people say? Ruth asked eventually. When we come back married with a baby. Let them say what they want. Crick will vouch for us. Say we married quiet before coming up here. Say Grace came early but healthy. Ward shrugged. People believe what they want to believe anyway. And you don't mind raising another man's child. Ward reached out, ran one finger along Grace's tiny cheek. She turned toward the touch, making small sucking sounds. She's not another man's child. She's yours, and now she's mine. That's all that matters. Ruth felt tears threaten again hormones, exhaustion, and something deeper. This man who'd lost his own family had opened his heart to her and her bastard child, offered them not just protection but belonging. Ward. Thank you for everything, for saving us, for delivering Grace, for... Family doesn't thank family, he said gruffly. Now rest. You've earned it. Ruth dozed, Grace still at her breast. When she woke, Ward had moved his chair closer, his hand resting protective on the blanket near the baby. He was awake, watching them both with something like wonder. Can't sleep, she asked softly. Just thinking about Jimmy. He would have loved a sister. Tell me about him. And Ward did, speaking softly in the lamplight about a boy who loved horses and fishing, who laughed easily and feared nothing. Ruth listened, understanding this sharing for the gift it was. Grace slept between them, breathing easy, perfect in her smallness. She'll know about him, Ruth promised. About Jimmy and Sarah both. They'll be part of her story. Ward nodded, unable to speak. Outside, the storm howled, but inside was warmth and new life and the fragile, precious beginning of a family stitched together from loss and love and sheer stubborn survival. Grace stirred, whimpering. Ruth shifted her to the other breast, marveling at the instinct,
the tiny mouth that knew exactly what to do. Look at her, born too early in a cabin in a blizzard, and she's already fighting for what she needs. Like her mother, Ward said softly.
Like her father, too,
Ruth corrected, and watched Ward's eyes fill with something that might have been tears. They were married 2 weeks later by a traveling preacher Crick brought to the lower cabin. Grace slept through the ceremony, content in her father's arms. And if anyone noticed, the baby seemed a bit large for being so premature. They kept their thoughts to themselves. Ward Ellis was not a man to cross, and Ruth Ellis, as she signed her name with pride, had proven she could defend what was hers. The certificate read, Grace Ellis, born to Ward and Ruth Ellis, March 15, 1867. The lie became truth through love and choosing, and Grace would grow up knowing only that she was wanted, protected, cherished, which was, Ruth thought, the greatest truth of all. Spring came late to the mountain that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the world. Wildflowers pushed through the last patches of snow, and Grace, now 2 months old, had grown round and healthy despite her early arrival. Ruth had regained her strength, and the little family had settled into a rhythm of contentment that felt almost too good to trust. Ward was splitting wood behind the cabin when Jedediah Crick arrived, his wagon laboring up the muddy trail. But this time, his face bore no good humor. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "Inside, now." Ruth felt ice form in her stomach as they gathered around the table. Grace slept peacefully in the cradle Ward had built, unaware of the tension filling the room. Ezra Dole had a brother. Crick began. Younger, meaner, and according to my sources, gathering men for revenge. Name's Marcus Dole. He's put out word $100 to whoever brings him Ruth and the baby. Ward's hand moved instinctively to where his rifle leaned against the wall. "How many?" "Last count 15, maybe 20. Hired guns, mostly. The kind who'd sell their own mothers for drinking money." Crick pulled a flask from his coat, took a swig. "They're 2 days out, maybe 3. Been asking questions in every town from here to the border." "We could run," Ruth said quietly. "Head north to Canada, or—" "No," Ward's voice was granite. "We're done running. This is our home." "Ward, be reasonable." Crick urged, 20 men. I said no. He stood, pacing to the window. "They want to fight. They'll get one, but Ruth and Grace aren't leaving." Ruth recognized the set of his shoulders, the stubborn tilt of his jaw. "Then we fight together," she said. Both men turned to stare at her. "Ruth," Ward began. "I can shoot. You know I can. I won't hide while you face them alone." She met his eyes steadily. "We're family. Family stands together." Crick looked between them, then sighed. "Figured you'd say that, which is why I didn't come alone." He went to the door, whistled sharply. 3 riders emerged from the tree line. Samuel Briggs, the marshal who'd helped before, and 2 men Ruth didn't recognize. "Mrs. Ellis," Briggs touched his hat. "Heard you might have some trouble coming. These are my deputies, Tom Morrison and Jake Hawkins. Good men in a fight." 5 against 20, Ward calculated grimly. 6, Ruth corrected. "And we have the advantage. We know they're coming." They spent the next day preparing. Ward and the men dug defensive positions, set up crossfire points, cached ammunition. Ruth cooked enough food for a siege, filled every container with water, prepared bandages from torn sheets. On the second morning, Hawkins, who'd been scouting, rode in hard. "They're coming? Hour out, maybe less." Ruth's hands trembled as she checked Sarah's pistol one more time. Ward caught her shoulders, made her look at him. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." She managed a weak smile. "Remember what you said Grace was born fighting? Well, she gets it from somewhere." He kissed her then, quick and fierce. "Stay alive," he ordered.
Both of you." Ruth took position at an upper window where she could cover the approaches. Grace lay in her cradle in the far corner, surrounded by quilts that might stop a stray bullet. The baby slept on, blissfully unaware. They came like Ward predicted, spread out, cautious but confident in their numbers. Ruth recognized Marcus Dole immediately. He had Ezra's red hair, but none of his brother's pretense at civilization. This was a killer, pure and simple. "Ward Ellis," Marcus called. "You killed my brother. I'm here to return the favor. Send out his wife and the brat, and maybe I'll make your death quick." "Your brother got what he deserved," Ward called back. "Same as you will if you don't turn around." Marcus laughed, ugly and harsh. "20 guns say different. Boys, burn them out." The first shots shattered the morning calm. Ruth ducked as bullets sparked off the window frame, then rose and fired at a man trying to circle to the barn. He went down, clutching his leg. The battle was fierce from the start. The attackers had expected easy prey, not a fortified position with experienced defenders. Briggs and his deputies were marksmen, picking off targets with deadly efficiency. Ward's rifle never seemed to stop firing. But there were so many. For every man who fell, 2 more pushed forward. They reached the barn, and smoke began to rise. Then the woodshed caught fire. "They're trying to drive us out," Hawkins yelled. A group rushed the front door. Ward met them with shotgun blasts, but one got through, bursting into the cabin. Ruth shot him twice before he could raise his weapon. His blood spread across the floor she'd scrubbed just days before. Grace woke then, wailing. Ruth's heart clenched, but she couldn't go to her. Not yet. Another man appeared at her window. She fired, missed, fired again. He tumbled backward. "Rue." Ward's warning came almost too late. She spun to find a man climbing through the back window. His gun swung toward her, toward Grace's corner. "No!" Ruth threw herself sideways, firing wildly. Pain exploded through her shoulder as his bullet found her, but her shots found him too. He fell half in, half out of the window. Ward was there instantly, pulling her behind cover. "How bad?" "I'm fine," but blood soaked her dress, and the room spun. "Like hell you are." He tore fabric, packed the wound. "Stay down." "Grace." "I'll protect her. Stay down." The fight raged on. Ruth pressed her back against the wall, trying to stay conscious. She could hear Crick somewhere, swearing creatively as he fired. Morrison was down. She'd seen him fall. How many attackers were left? Then Marcus Dole's voice, closer now. "Ellis, your woman's hit. I saw it. How long before she bleeds out? How long before that baby's an orphan?" Ward's response was a shot that sent Marcus diving for cover. "Getting personal now?" Marcus laughed. "That's good. Personal makes it sweeter. Tell me, Ellis, when I'm done with you, should I raise the brat myself, teach her what her real daddy was, a coward who ran?" Ruth saw Ward go very still. When he spoke, his voice was death itself. "You won't touch her." "Won't I? Maybe I'll—" He never finished. Ward moved like liquid shadow, out the door before anyone could stop him. Ruth dragged herself to the window in time to see him striding across the yard, rifle steady, completely exposed but untouchable in his fury. Marcus rose from cover, bringing his gun up. Ward shot him through the heart without breaking stride. Then he turned on the remaining attackers, who seemed frozen by his absolute lack of fear. "Who's next?" he called. "Who else wants to threaten my daughter?" Maybe it was the sight of their leader falling. Maybe it was Ward's transformation into something primal and terrifying. Or maybe it was Briggs and his men picking off runners. But the attack broke. Men fled for horses, riding hard into the forest. In minutes, the yard was empty except for the dead and dying. Ward stood among them, chest heaving, rifle still raised. Then his shoulders sagged, and he turned back toward the cabin. Ruth met him at the door, Grace in her good arm. the other hanging useless. "Is it over?" "It's over." He caught them both, gentle with her injury. "God, Ruth, when I saw you fall." "I'm here. We're here." She leaned into his strength. "You called her your daughter." "She is my daughter." His voice broke. "And you're my wife. Nobody threatens what's mine. Nobody." Crick appeared, grinning despite a graze on his cheek. "Well, that was lively. Briggs is rounding up survivors. Doubt they'll be eager to try again. How many did we lose?" "Morrison's hit but alive. Hawkins took one in the arm. Could have been worse." He looked at Ruth's shoulder. "You need a doctor." "I need to feed my daughter," Ruth said stubbornly. But Ward was already guiding her to a chair, examining the wound with gentle hands. "Bullet went through clean. You were lucky." "We all were." As Crick had predicted, the survivors scattered like quail. Briggs took 2 prisoners. The rest vanished into the wilderness. Marcus Dole was buried without ceremony in an unmarked grave. The others they left for the scavengers. That evening, as Ward carefully cleaned and bandaged Ruth's shoulder, Grace nursed contentedly, oblivious to the violence that had swirled around her. "We can't keep doing this," Ruth said quietly. "Fighting off every threat. What kind of life is that for her?" "It's done now," Ward said firmly. "The Dole brothers are dead. Word will spread nobody touches the Ellis family. Nobody." "You sound so certain." "I am." He tied off the bandage, then cupped her face in his hands. "I failed Sarah and Jimmy. Couldn't protect them from fever. But I can protect you from men. I will protect you." Ruth caught his hand, pressed it to her lips. "We protect each other. That's what family does." Grace finished nursing, milk-drunk and content. Ruth shifted her to Ward's arms, watching the big man hold the tiny baby with infinite tenderness. In the lamplight, with the smoke cleared and the blood washed away, they looked like any family anywhere, father, mother, child. "She slept through most of it," Ruth marveled. "Our daughter slept through a gunfight." "Mountain-born," Ward said proudly. "Takes more than a little noise to bother her." They were interrupted by Crick, knocking politely. "Sorry to intrude, but thought you should know. Briggs is spreading word anyone who comes after the Ellis family will face federal charges. He's making it official." "We're grateful," Ward said. "Don't be. You've earned it." Crick studied them, the bandaged woman, the man holding a baby like precious glass, the cabin scarred by bullets but standing strong. "You know what, I think you're going to be just fine." After he left, they sat in peaceful quiet. Grace made small sounds, tiny fists waving. Ruth leaned against Ward's uninjured side, feeling drowsiness creep over her despite the pain. "No more running," she murmured. "No more looking over our shoulders." "No more," Ward agreed. "Just living, raising our daughter, being a family." "Think we can do that, be a normal family?" Ward chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Ruth, we're a thrown-together family living in a bullet-riddled cabin on a mountain, built from loss and stubbornness and more gunfights than I can count. Normal was never an option." "Good," Ruth said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "Normal sounds boring anyway." Grace gurgled, as if in agreement. And despite everything, the pain, the violence, the long, strange journey that had brought them together, Ruth found herself smiling. They were battered but unbroken. They were unconventional and battle-scarred and fiercely protective of each other. They were family. And that, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, was worth any fight. 5 years had passed since the last gunfight, and the mountain had become a place of peace. The bullet holes in the cabin walls had been patched and painted over, though Ward insisted on leaving one. "So we remember," he'd said, and Ruth understood. Some things shouldn't be forgotten, even when they're forgiven. Grace had grown into a spirited child with her mother's dark hair and, somehow,
Ward's steady gray eyes. She ran barefoot through the meadows, collected wildflowers, and helped her father with the gentler animals. She knew nothing of her origins beyond what mattered, that she was loved, fiercely and completely. Ruth stood at the clothesline, hanging fresh-washed sheets in the summer breeze. Her shoulder ached sometimes, especially before storms. But the old wound had healed clean. She watched Grace chase chickens across the yard, laughing as they scattered. "Grace Ellis, leave those poor birds alone," she called, but she was smiling. "They like it, Mama," Grace protested, then shrieked with delight as the rooster turned and chased her instead. Ward emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd filled out in the years of peace, no longer gaunt with grief. Silver touched his temples now, but his movements were still sure and strong. He caught Grace as she fled the rooster, swinging her up onto his shoulders. "What's this, a chicken attacking my girl?" "Papa, save me," Grace giggled, safe in her perch. Watching them, Ruth felt that familiar warmth bloom in her chest. They'd built something here, the three of them. Not just a home, but a life, complete with vegetable gardens and a small orchard Ward had planted for Grace's future. The violence that had brought them together seemed like another lifetime. That evening, after Grace was asleep, Ruth found Ward on the porch, whittling by lamplight. She settled beside him, her journal in her lap. "Writing again?" he asked, glancing at the filled pages. "For Grace, so she'll know where she came from. The truth of it, when she's old enough." Ruth traced the leather cover. "Is that wrong?" "No, truth's important. When she asks, and she will ask, she deserves to know." He set down his knife. "What will you tell her about her blood father?" Ruth had thought long on this. That he was young and foolish and not ready for the gift of her. That his leaving brought us together. That Ward Ellis chose to be her father, which matters more than blood ever could. Ward was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You always know the right words." "Not always. Remember when I tried to explain where babies come from? You've never seen a child look so horrified." He chuckled. "She told me babies were better when you could just find them in the garden like cabbages." They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Inside, Grace murmured in her sleep, dreaming whatever dreams 5-year-olds cherish. "I have something for you," Ward said suddenly. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, wrapped package. Ruth opened it carefully. Inside lay a delicate silver locket on a chain. Her breath caught. "Ward, open it." She did, finding 2 tiny photographs, one of Grace as a baby, the other of all 3 of them taken by a traveling photographer last spring. They looked so proper, so formal, so much like a real family that tears pricked her eyes. "Thought you should have something fine," Ward said gruffly. "Something that wasn't practical or necessary, just beautiful." Ruth kissed him then, soft and sure. 5 years of marriage had deepened what started as mutual need into something richer. Not the wild passion she'd once thought she wanted, but a steady flame that warmed without burning. Help me put it on." His fingers fumbled with the delicate clasp, but finally secured it. The locket lay cool against her throat, catching the lamplight. "Beautiful," he said, but he was looking at her face, not the jewelry. They were interrupted by hoofbeats on the trail. Both tensed old habits died hard but relaxed when Jedediah Crick's familiar whistle reached them. The trader visited monthly now, bringing supplies and news from the outside world. "Evening, folks," he called, climbing down from his wagon. "Got mail for you." Ruth's heart jumped. Mail was rare, usually meaning either very good or very bad news. Ward took the letter, frowning at the return address. "It's from Oregon," he said slowly, addressed to Ruth Wright. Ruth's hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was familiar Constance, her youngest sister, the one who'd wept as Ruth was taken away. Dear Ruth. I pray this letter finds you, though I only have Jedediah Crick's word that you're alive and well. I'm writing against Martha's wishes. She's forbidden your name in our house. But I'm 18 now, old enough to make my own choices. Thomas is dead, thrown from a horse last winter. He spoke of you at the end, said to tell you he was sorry. Sarah has married and moved to California. Martha grows more bitter each year. But I write with gladder news too. I'm to be married next month to a good man, a school teacher named Henry Porter. We plan to move to Montana Territory to start fresh. I hope that I might see you again. I think of you often. Sister, I pray you've found happiness. Your loving sister. Constance. Ruth read it twice, then handed it wordlessly to Ward. He scanned it, then pulled her close as she wept not from sadness but from a complex mix of loss and hope and the strange circularity of life. Will you write back? He asked when her tears subsided. Yes, tomorrow. She wiped her eyes. I'll tell her about us, about Grace, about the life we've built. Invite her to visit, Ward suggested. Family should know family. Ruth looked at him wonderingly. You'd welcome my sister after everything. She was a child then, and she's your blood. He smiled. Besides, Grace should know she has an aunt. Family's precious. Ruth, we both know that. The next morning, Ruth sat at the kitchen table, composing her response while Grace helped by drawing pictures to send to her unknown aunt. Ward had taken the wagon to town for supplies, whistling as he drove away. Dear Constance. Your letter found me not just alive, but thriving. I'm married now to a good man named Ward Ellis. We have a daughter, Grace, who's 5 and perfect. We live on a small ranch in the mountains, and I wake each day grateful for the life I never expected to have. I grieve for Thomas. Despite everything, I hope he found peace. As for Martha's bitterness, that's hers to carry, not mine. I've learned that family isn't just blood. It's choice. It's the people who stand by you when the world turns cruel. Please visit us after your wedding. I want to know the woman you've become. I want you to meet my daughter, your niece. I want to show you that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best. The past is done. The future is bright. Come share it with us. Your sister still. Ruth Ellis. As she sealed the letter, Grace climbed into her lap. Mama, who's Aunt Constance? My sister, your aunt. She might come visit us. Grace's eyes widened. I have an aunt. Does she know stories? Does she like tea parties? I don't know. Sweetheart, we'll have to ask when she comes. Will she love me? Ruth hugged her daughter tight. How could she not? You're very lovable. Ward returned in the afternoon with the wagon full of supplies and news from town. Crick says there's talk of the railroad coming through the valley. Might bring changes. Good changes or bad? Both, probably, but we'll weather them. He lifted Grace, who'd run to greet him. We've weathered worse. That evening, they walked to the small cemetery Ward had made on the hillside. 2 markers stood there. Sarah Ellis and James Ellis, beloved wife and son. They visited monthly, bringing wildflowers, sharing news of their lives. Grace always had important things to tell Jimmy about new kittens, the frogs she'd caught, how she was learning to read. Papa's teaching me to ride, she informed the small headstone seriously. He says I'm a natural. Maybe you would have been too. Ruth squeezed Ward's hand. These visits had been painful at first, but now held a bittersweet peace. The dead were honored. The living continued on. As they walked back home, Grace between them, holding both their hands. Ruth reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. A desperate girl, sold by her family, carrying shame and another man's child. A broken man, hollowed by loss, going through empty motions of living, a baby born too soon in fear and flight. Somehow, from all that pain had come this, a family forged not in perfection, but in choice, in standing together against the world's cruelty. They'd fought for this peace, bled for it, killed for it when necessary, and now they lived it, day by ordinary day.
Mama,
Grace said suddenly, "When I grow up, will you tell me all the stories, even the sad ones?" Ruth met Ward's eyes over their daughter's head. "When you're ready, yes, all the stories." "Good. I like stories, especially ones where the people win at the end." "Those are the best kind," Ward agreed, swinging Grace up as she squealed with delight. The cabin came into view, smoke rising peaceful from the chimney. Home, their battle-scarred, love-filled, imperfect home. Ruth touched the locket at her throat, feeling the weight of their captured faces against her heart. Asterisk, maybe God doesn't punish after all, she thought, remembering her words from years ago. Asterisk, maybe he just plants seeds in strange soil and waits to see what grows. What had grown here was a love harder earned than any fairy tale, a family bound by choice rather than chance, a life built on the ashes of old pain. It wasn't the life Ruth had imagined as a girl, dreaming of California gold and easy promises. It was better. It was real. "Race you home," Grace broke free, running ahead with the boundless energy of childhood. Ward and Ruth followed more slowly, hands linked, no need for haste. They had time now. They had peace. They had each other. And in the end, that was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story from the Wild West. I hope Ruth and Ward's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening from today? Please leave a comment and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about this story. What did you think about Ruth's incredible journey from rejection to redemption? Your comments mean the world to us.